When one speaks of achieving liberation, that is to say, of awakening as the Buddha is awake, one has only a vague idea as to what that actually means. And as I've explained before, the reason for that is that enlightenment is really not described in any tangible way. The reason why it's not described in any tangible way is that enlightenment is the state of enlightenment, the state of precious awakening that the Buddha described when he said about himself, "I am awake." That state of realization is conditionless. It is free of all conceptualization. Therefore, if we try to put conditions on it by verbalizing its characteristics, if we try to conceptualize as to what that enlightenment is, then we will find ourselves in a very difficult situation because we will actually lose the meaning of enlightenment. The difficulty about describing enlightenment is that once you have described it, you have lost it. The difficulty about trying to nail down, if you will, the meaning of enlightenment is that once you've nailed it down, you have placed conditions upon it. That's the only way that one can hold thought. So placing conditions upon it, then one has lost its essential nature. Because the state of enlightenment is described as being non-specific awareness, sort of an innate wakefulness. Free of conditions, free of all conceptualizations, it is described in the Vajrayana path as being the union of luminosity and emptiness. But again, once we try to understand what luminosity is, we have to think about light bulbs and sunshine and things like that. That kind of solid light is not really what is being described. When we speak of that kind of luminosity having to do with mind, we speak more of awakeness, wakefulness, awareness, but non-specific, having no subjective-objective connection. And then when we think of emptiness, we think of emptiness as being the opposite of fullness, and therefore emptiness for us becomes a thing. It becomes just as solid as fullness. And that is not the understanding of emptiness that we follow when we understand the Buddhist teaching. Emptiness is inseparable from fullness. Emptiness is inseparable. One could say that emptiness is inseparable from appearance. Emptiness is inseparable from movement. It is conditionless as well. And even here in my meanderings, trying to describe to you something of that pristine state, that pristine conditionless state, I have done you a disservice. And that you may make the mistake of walking out of here thinking that you, the brain, understands. The nature of that precious state is such that one cannot think one understands. One cannot think oneself into enlightenment. One cannot fabricate enlightenment, and that's what you do when you're thinking. You're building structure upon structure upon structure. One cannot build a superstructure called enlightenment. You can't dress up a mind state as emptiness and think that it's empty. That simply cannot happen. So here we have already done a disservice, and here perhaps we may make the mistake of walking away thinking that we understand. The best way to listen to what I have just said is to listen not with your brain, if you can imagine such a thing, but only listen as a bowl listens, by being like this, simply letting it pour in. It's different from listening with a brain that tries to discriminate one point from another and to pick away one fiber from another. It's a different process. However, what we do know, and this is what we are told again and again and again, very specifically, and with great effort, we are told that we have not reached enlightenment. That's what is described to us ad nauseum, if you will. Because the teaching is very firm and very clear about making us understand that we are wandering in cyclic existence, that we are wandering in samsara, that we are filled with conceptualization of all kind, that we are actually constantly building and constantly creating a continuum experience which has as its foundation and is actually based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. And all of the ideas and concepts that we have that come from that are, if you will, scaffolding or some kind of strange superstructure that we just keep building and climbing up on, then climbing down from, then taking apart and rebuilding. That's really what our experience is actually like. Interesting, isn't it? That we in our delusion do not understand that we are simply following a continuum of our own making. And the continuum is such that if we did not continue it, it would not continue. But it's real. That's how we feel about it. What actually happens during that process? We have a juncture or coming together of a couple of different things. First of all, we have our senses. We have our vision, touch, taste, smell, hearing. I can never remember lists. This is why I teach in an unorthodox way. In Buddhism, there are lists. They are into lists. The 10 this and the 9 that's and the 4 immeasurables and the 17 other things. You've lost me there in those. So I try to get the feeling across, you know. Anyway, I know that we have 5 senses, and if I think real carefully, I can remember them all. So we have this coming together of the senses, and what do they come together with? Well, actually, let's describe the senses first of all. What are these senses? I've had people say to me again and again and again, if I can't see it, I'm not going to believe in it. Well, do you believe that there is a China? How many of you have been to China? I rest my case. Do you believe that there is a king of Nepal? How many of you have met him? How many of you even seen his picture? Well, good, you've seen his picture. She's a believer now. The camera never lies, isn't that true? Pardon?
He looks a lot like Peter Sellers.
He does, that's right, I know. At any rate, we have all of these assumptions that we make based on these 5 senses. But the 5 senses, according to the Buddhist teaching, are only ways to compute relativity. The way that that computation takes place is that we have the foundational preconception of believing in self-nature, that is ego, as being inherently real. From that, we jump off into the 5 senses. And I've given this teaching before, so I'll do it very briefly. I have this glass here of cool water. It's cool. It's also wet. Why is this water cool to me? Because I am a warm-blooded mammal. If I were a fish that lived in the waters of Antarctica, this would seem sweltering to me. So the understanding of the coolness of this water is relative to my perception of self. Is that understood? Now this glass seems to me pretty small, because I'm a big, healthy kind of girl. But if there were an ant crawling across the base of this glass, wouldn't that glass of water seem endlessly large to him? He wouldn't really have a clear idea as to where the top of it was. So to him, the glass is very large. Those are the 5 senses in whom you put so much trust. They are actually extensions of one's ego. And that's all they are. They are extensions of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. That's what the 5 senses are. They come about due to the karma of our mind, the cause and effect relationships that have made up the continuum of our mind stream. And we've heard this again and again and again, and I know that it's true, that any two people can view the same object and going away from it describe it completely differently. That any 10 people seeing an accident will drive one policeman crazy because they will all have seen 10 different things. This happens again and again and again. Any 10 people experiencing a life crisis will experience it in totally different ways. That is to say, for one it will be water off a duck's back, and for another one it will crush their bones. And we also know this is true from our own experience. We can have a life crisis that spans 3 days, and we will feel differently about it on each day. So we all know that this is true. These are the 5 senses. Now the 5 senses are the ones that give us this information, but they really only give us this information when they meet with an object. So the juncture there that I'm speaking of is the senses and the object. This connection happening is an important element in the continuation of one's particular individual experience or one's revolution in samsara or cyclic existence. Is that we constantly have the 5 senses, and with the 5 senses we perceive objects. Let's take, for instance, the perception. You guys don't need to be listening to this anymore. You can think about England, or what you're going to have for lunch, or whatever. Or you can think about the old days. Let's say that a man, are there mostly men in this room? No, a woman. Okay. Let's say a woman meets a very handsome man. With her eyes, she sees this handsome man, and she's filled with love. Desire, actually, is what she's filled with. She's filled with desire. And she thinks, I wish to have this man as my very own. And from that meeting of the senses and the object, there is a continuum that occurs from that juncture, from that very moment, that becomes, from its inception and through its continuation, quite real in seemingly quite real. From that meeting of the senses and the object, there will be, due to the hidden pattern of desire and the belief in self-nature as being inherently real in the mind stream, from that point will be born a brand new continuum, where before that juncture meeting, there was no such resonance. There was no such connection between these senses and this object. Suddenly, a new world has begun. And this woman cannot stop thinking about this man. Suddenly, it is the meaning of her life. She wakes up in the morning thinking about him. She can't eat right because she's thinking about him. She goes to bed thinking about him. If he rejects her, she becomes angry, and she suffers, and due to that anger, she looks around to see what the source of her suffering is, and if she finds out that the man, for instance, is interested in some other woman, then she becomes angry at that woman. Suddenly she has a continuum with that woman that she didn't have before. And let's say if the man accepts the woman and they get together, then she has to spend all of her time from that point on deciding how she's going to keep him and revolving in hope and fear. I hope it works out. I fear that it will not. That's just delusion. The whole scene is just delusion. I hope it works out. I fear that it will not. I hope it. I fear. I hope, fear. And it continues like that. And now we must engage in activity that is protective of what we hope. So we look to see if the man is looking at anyone else. We look to see if there's any lipstick on the collar. Whatever it is that people do in their relationships. And even if we're quite relaxed about all of this, there is still that fear at the seed of every such meeting that once we found something we like, we're going to lose it. And we're afraid of that, dreadfully afraid of that. And that fear sets up an entire dynamic, doesn't it? Have you ever lived with that kind of hope and fear? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, you have. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you don't know much about the nature of your mind. Now, what do we do in our practice? Now, in certain elements of the Buddha's teaching, and there are different ways to approach this issue. One can do what these folks have done. They have taken robes and taken vows of celibacy. They know that they're never going to be in this position again. So through that decision, through knowing, we're talking about never until you die. There's no reason to get involved in that, and many of them have described to me a sense of inner relaxation. It's as though there's a tension that used to be there that is no longer there anymore. And so that's one method, but that method doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone has the karma for that method, and not everyone should take that method because it simply isn't right for them. In Vajrayana, there's another method, and it is a method more clearly associated with lay people. And in that method, one does not repress such desires. One does not denounce them, neither does one cut them out from one's life. But instead, what one does is to examine this juncture point that I have just described. The five senses, the meeting of the senses and the object, and then the consciousness or superstructure continuum that is born at that point. From examining one's mind, examining exactly what has just happened, one can learn a great deal. Like, for instance, the whole experience that one is having of desire is purely one of one's own making. That the whole experience one is having of suffering because of loss is absolutely a contrivance on one's own part. A house that one has built with one's own blocks, one's own tools, and one's own hands. That it has no inherent reality. That before the meeting of the five senses and the object, there was nothing like that. And even upon the meeting of the five senses and the object, well, here's a glass of water. I'm not going to fall in love with it. It's my conscious determination of what that object is that causes my reaction. I, for instance, as a woman, have met many men in my lifetime. By no means have I fallen in love with all of them. The difference is that the senses and the object have met, but one did not build that house, that superstructure, that continuum. One can come to understand also that one has certain habitual tendencies, that under certain conditions, one seems to be more likely to react in a certain way, like dark hair, dark eyes. That does it for a lot of women. And that being the case, one can begin to examine what is this juncture between the five senses and that object, dark hair, dark eyes. What is the meaning of that? What is the content of that? If we had, well, this is kind of gruesome, but let's say they didn't come together in the form of a man. Let's say there were two dark eyes over here and some dark hair over here. Let's say the hair grew on a plant. Let's say the eyes were swimming in this glass of water. Are you going to fall in love with that? I think, to speak from an ordinary point of view, at some point you're going to realize you're in control, Jack. The ball's in your court and you're the one throwing it around and you're doing it all by yourself. Now that's a really stupid way to teach the Buddha Dharma, isn't it? I know that you guys come here on Sunday and wonder what is going on here. But the teaching is essentially the same. It is absolutely the same. And these are situations that we as Americans can understand. It's very hard for us to really understand the philosophical, esoteric, intertwining of all of this stuff in such a way as to make it real in our lives, because we have the habit as Americans of having our religion over here and our lives over here. So my approach then to teaching the Buddha Dharma is to teach the very same esoteric philosophical hoo-ha, and teach it in such a way that you can walk out of here and really use it. Now, I want you to know that because I have used women as an example, the reason why I've done that is because there are more women in this room than men. But I want you to know, men, that you are not exempt from this teaching. You are not out of here because of gender. In fact, you guys are worse than we ever were. You have a reputation for it. And it's founded in truth. So please understand that you're not off the hook just because I'm using women as an example. The point of all of this, what is the point of all of this anyway? The point of all of this is so we can walk out of here with an understanding as to how to examine our minds. Time and time again I have said to you, examine your mind. The Vajrayana perspective that is particularly unique is that we use our environment, we use phenomena to actually examine our minds. We actually use our own byproducts, if you will, our own consciousness byproducts as a way to get a fix. We actually utilize, if you will, desire. For instance, the desire that a person would feel for a potential romantic partner. We use that desire not as something to play with, not as something to continue our suffering, not as something to cause us to endlessly revolve in cyclic existence, but instead we use that desire as a way to understand something of the building blocks that come together, something of our minds. So what is this thing made of that we're flipping out over? Let's say we've really got a bad case. Let's say one has you've had a bad case, haven't you? Come on, you know that you've had a bad case. So let's say one has a terrible bad case. We're talking about the itchy scratchies. This one's bad. You have the capacity now to use that situation as an extraordinary opportunity to receive the best and most potent teaching, because it's going to be a different response than sitting in a classroom thinking about someone else that's suffering. You're in the middle of it. And the thing about being in the middle of it is you have to sink or swim. And here's how you swim. You can examine this potent experience, and you can use the actual discomfort of it, the actual fire of it, if you will, to potentize your own experience. Use that energy to penetrate into your own awareness. Understand what these five senses are. Think about how they come together. Think about how they are only measures of relativity. And we're talking about relativity based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, based on the clinging to ego. That's what these five senses are. That the meeting with the object is what has actually happened here. The five senses have met with an object, and from that have done a kind of crazy spin-off number based on certain habitual tendencies that are within the mind. And all of those habitual tendencies come from time out of mind experience that you yourself have experienced. And you have developed certain habits about reacting in certain ways for one reason and one reason only. Because you have reacted that way before, period. And if you continue that reaction in your present condition, you will simply continue the habit, period. That's what just happened to you. Examining that, don't you wonder why it is that your whole experience is wrenched to the gut over this big romantic deal? Isn't it odd? Isn't it wonderful, though, when you come to the point of view in your practice, when examining your mind, you realize that you are experiencing your own continuum. And that experiencing your own continuum, you can choose not to continue it. You're luckier than, say, a cat. You ever seen a cat? A cat has the experience of every time a fly is up against the window, they're like, their eyes get big, you know. They start doing this, I'm going to kill you number. And they get their claws and they start doing like this and they get totally compulsive, right? They're totally compulsive. Why is a cat totally compulsive? He is totally compulsive because he has had the experience of killing and has developed the habit of killing many, many, many times. Therefore, he is born in a form of a compulsive killer. Cats are really compulsive killers. Yes, our sweet little pussycats. They are compulsive killers. They love to do that. They're into it. But the cat's in a different position than you. He can't say, whoa, back up, wait a minute. He can't say, let's think this through. We're looking at 5 senses meeting with a fly. Now what's really happening? But you can do that. You can do that. You're in a better position than he is. Why? I don't know why it is, but sometimes we don't act like we're in a better position than the cat is. We just keep swatting away, don't we? But we are. And that is a perfect opportunity to use the teaching. Now please forgive my familiar, ordinary, kind of common, everyday way of offering you this teaching. Sometimes I'm more formal than others. But this is the kind of teaching that it doesn't make any sense to memorize if you can't use it when you're out of here. If you cannot apply it to your own life, it doesn't matter if you have the theory down. But if you can begin to break your own habitual tendencies, recognizing what they are, you can make a difference in your life. You can use this very old directive that Lord Buddha himself gave us when he said, watch your mind. You can start right now. Because I think having laughed at yourself, having continued in the way that you have just continued, you have perhaps begun to derive a skill. And hopefully that skill, through the power of your deeper understanding of what you have just heard and your own powerful laughing at yourselves, will be imprinted with you, and you can use it later. Use it not when you're feeling good. Use it when you're feeling bad. When you have to do something. So from the Vajrayana point of view, that would be perfectly in harmony with our particular method of approaching practice. Use your life as a way to practice. It's not different from what I said to the children when you offer your life up as a precious jewel mandala. You use every experience in your life as a way to practice. And in that way, one sees the face of the teacher everywhere one looks. That is true devotion. One sees the face of the Buddha, one sees the face of the teacher everywhere one looks. And come to know that it is one's own face. Nanda, Nanda.